Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Michael Beardsley of Oshkosh is a Democratic candidate in the 6th Congressional District. The primary is August 11. Michael, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
Well, I'm just curious. What do you consider the top issue in your campaign? Excuse me.
Yeah, so it's hard to pick one. I have a few top ones, but if I had to pick, climate change would definitely be the top. I think it faces or it provides the biggest risk to not just this country, but the entire world. So that'd be the one if I had to pick.
Okay, and the next steps that you really feel are critical in fighting climate change?
Yeah, so I'm a proponent of the Green New Deal. I think that's a good overall plan. There's a lot of things in there that I would like to highlight to make sure that's something that we make sure we do. Specifically, a carbon tax I think is very much needed. It's touted as kind of from experts one of the main things we can do to really force the market to move to sustainable energy. Some other things we can do. Quickly, I'll just note carbon tax is bipartisan bill that has passed the House in the past, this last session. It dies in the Senate usually every time, but it's something that does have bipartisan support. A couple other things we can do. We need to get back into the Paris Climate Accord agreement. We need to increase our fuel efficiency standards, all these different things to really force the market to adopt these technologies that exist, but we just don't use them to the extent today that we need to.
Okay. Another important priority listed on your website is healthcare reform. Let me ask it this way. As you're aware, the U.S. Supreme Court just agreed to decide whether Obamacare is legal. If the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Obamacare, what would you as a member of Congress, take as the next steps on healthcare?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court decision will be interesting, but I think regardless of the decision, I'm very much in favor of a single payer system. I think that's the next step, regardless of what happens with Obamacare. Obamacare was a good step in the right direction, but I don't think it goes far enough in addressing really the core issues that we're facing with healthcare. So a single payer system is popularly known as Medicare for All. The key things to make sure that happens is that it's publicly ran. And nonprofit. So the profit is one of the real big issues with our system today, where we have companies exploiting basically our human right that is healthcare. And I think that's very wrong. So what I like about a single payer system is we're all on the same plan. There's no co-pays, there's no out-of-pocket expenses, there's no confusion on if you're in network or out of network. The simplicity is that we're all on the same plan. Essentially, the deductible turns into a income tax, which we're already paying 1.35% for Medicaid, which many of us don't even have access to. That tax would increase to 4%, so you're paying proportionate to what you make, and we all have access to the same healthcare. So that is what I would propose.
How do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the healthcare debate in this country, Michael?
I think it's changed it a lot. I think it's really pushed the needle to show that, I think it's exposed our current system, especially the fact that the majority of our healthcare right now is tied to employment, which we're one of the only countries in the world that does that primarily. So I think that's another benefit of single payer system is we're getting rid of that relationship with our employer that we depend on healthcare for, especially with 40 million people out of a job. The vast majority of them have lost their access to healthcare. And like you said, we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is just unfathomable to me. So I think it's really exposed kind of the major flaws of what we're facing today and where we should go.
You think we're closer to universal healthcare as a result of this pandemic that we're still fighting our way through?
I think the narrative is closer. We haven't really moved closer. With the Supreme Court decision coming up, we might move a little backwards. But I think the narrative is moving in the right direction.
Should Congress pass another COVID-19 relief package? If so, who should that relief package target? And I guess my third question related to that is, what about the soaring federal debt? Is that part of this debate, or should we set that aside as we focus on recovering as a economy?
I think that's a good question. I don't think it should be completely set aside. So I'll start with the first half of that, I guess. So I do think that there should be another relief package. So I've been a vocal supporter of getting direct cash payments to the people and businesses. So similar to the first one, where most people got $1,200 depending on their family situation and their income. So I think it should be pretty minimally targeted based on income, just like the first one. So if you're a very high income earner, you don't need the same amount of money as the rest of us. But I'm still in favor of a direct cash payment. $1,200 might have been a little low, and I think now that was almost 2-3 months ago. So it's long overdue. There's still a lot of people out of work. There's still a lot of people that need money, bills coming up, bills that have been passed. So direct cash payments are the big one that I would like to see. And specifically for businesses, we saw a lot of controversy around businesses, especially large corporations, really kind of dipping into the pool a little bit. That was supposed to be intended for small to medium-sized businesses, but the regulations and the guidelines weren't really strict enough to narrow it down. So I think if we're doing more relief and support for businesses, which I think we should, because if we're closing everything down, we can't expect them to stay afloat when we're taking away their business, rightfully closing stuff down, I might add. So when we're doing that, we also have to make sure these businesses stay afloat. So we need, again, direct cash payments to them. Loans also sometimes work, I think, but I think the loan is kind of digging a hole that some of these companies might not ever get out of. So same answer for both of them, cash directly to them to keep them afloat. And then I'll address the debt a little bit. So it should be taken in consideration. We can't just blow that up. But as a lot of people know, that it's already huge, and that's not necessarily an end-all be-all. So I did a little research, and the current ratio compared to GDP is about 105, 106% right now, which is near the high end historically. But it's not all the way there. So in my opinion, there's still wiggle room to kind of increase that a little bit. It just needs to, in relation to the GDP, not get out of hand, because that's when we really get into big trouble. So if we're keeping it around just a little over 100% compared to GDP, I think we're all right.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said, well, any new COVID-19 package would have to include legal immunity for healthcare providers and some businesses. Do they deserve that?
This is a tough one. So I think during a pandemic, some unconventional things need to be allowed to happen. So I think it's a very fine line of giving full legal immunity. So I'm not sure what side I fall on this one, because like I said, we do need to tread a little lightly, but we can't allow full immunity, because there's a lot of the stuff is untested, unconfirmed, and we need to make sure that what these hospitals are doing isn't just reckless. So I would hope that's not the case, but it's 2020. You never know what else could happen. We don't want hospitals forcing treatments on patients that weren't fully fleshed out or weren't fully vetted and tested to at least some standards. Maybe the standards are loosened a little bit for efficiency and quickness, but I think there's a fine line where they need to loosen it a little bit, but not just free reign.
Another priority of your campaign listed on your website is criminal justice reform. Can you talk about what changes you'd be pushing for if you're a member of the U.S. House?
Yeah, and this is a very hot topic right now. So I'm in favor of a lot of different police reform. I think there's a lot we can do and a lot that should have been done in the past. So the big thing for me personally is I think the police really need to be demilitarized. I think the lines have been blurred between what the military's function is and what the police's function is, especially on the police side. I don't think in any situation police need to be acting as a military, be armed as a military. So there's a lot there we can do. There's some federal programs that exist that allow police departments to get military surplus, which in my opinion needs to end. Because again, there's no reason, for example, the town of Neenah, which is in my district, needs to have military tanks. It doesn't make sense, and it's expensive and it's inhumane, I think. So that's a big one. A couple other things we need to do. We need to have a national database for police officers, so we can avoid the town skipping situation where if someone gets arrested or someone gets fired for wrongdoing, they can't just go to the town over, get a job, and carry on. So there needs to be national tracking of that, which would need to happen at the federal level. Interestingly enough, Congressman Sensenbrenner has came out in support of this. So this is definitely something talked about on all sides of the aisle. And just in general, police need to be held accountable for their actions, just like civilians. So that includes ending qualified immunity. That includes mandating body cameras. I know that's kind of a gray area depending on the state or community. But one thing I would like to see on top of the body camera mandating is making that footage publicly available. Now, there's some legal stuff in there where if there's footage of, say, for me, example, if I'm on police cam footage, I would have to sign off to make that publicly available. But I think that needs to be a cornerstone of a lot of this. Since police are publicly funded, everything that they're recording and doing needs to be publicly accessible as well.
What about the call to ban chokeholds and to ban no-knock warrants, Michael?
Yes, no-knock warrants is a big one as well. Banning chokeholds obviously is something needed. A lot of places, like I think New York City, has already done that. So the banning is a needed step, but then you have to enforce it. So I think these other things need to happen where there needs to be independent investigations, an independent oversight committee for each city or community, that not only we make the ban in existence, but we also have an independent source that can punish wrongdoing there. Last thing I'll add is one thing I think is important with the rising costs of police departments here that we're seeing is anything to do with misconduct, legal fees, lawyer fees needs to be coming out of the police budgets, not the city's general fund. I think that's very important because if they're having this misconduct, they need to bear the cost of it. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. It's one thing to be a resident of the 6th Congressional District. It's another to try to represent it in the U.S. House. I'm wondering, since you announced your candidacy, what have you learned about the 6th CD in Wisconsin, Michael?
Well, that's a good question. So the district is very rural, but I don't think that necessarily means it's as red as people think it is. So I think historically it's leaned +8. I know it went +17 for Trump, which is alarming at first when you look at the numbers. But I think with everything, this district really wants change more than even I think I thought going into this thing. So whether that's on the right side or the left side, they want someone that's coming in, promising change, and backing it up with what we can actually do to make change. So that leaned Trump 4 years ago because he was promising all this change, draining the swamp, what have you. A lot of that didn't happen, and I think people are seeing that. So I think what I'm seeing is really the pendulum shift to the other side, where there's people that are sick of it and they're ready for something new. So I think that helps me, and I think that fits in well with the message I'm trying to bring to the table as well.
If the 6th ED has a lot of rural areas, what are you advocating in terms of helping farmers? Yeah,
so this one is a lot that what I'm specifically proposing so far. There is some stuff I'm working on with some farming experts as well, but a lot of this revolves around climate change again. So one thing I would really like to see happen is more federal programs that really incentivize small to medium farms and large farms to transition to sustainable practices. So that's a win for the environment, and that's also a win for these farms because, as we know, especially in Wisconsin, dairy farms are struggling, and we might not hear about that a lot because of everything else that's going on. But this has been really bubbling up for almost a decade. So there's something that needs to happen there to keep these farms afloat and to let them thrive, but also to make sure we're going in the right direction for the environment. And one major, I would say, transformational shift that needs to happen is a lot of these factory farms, mega farms are getting subsidies, which to me is a little backwards. So that needs to shift to the small and medium farms. So we're not letting these mega farms gobble up these small farms that go bankrupt. So it's a lot of trying to find new ways to provide relief, but not just provide a straight handout, because we need a win-win on the federal level for the environment and for the farms. So those are the big ones.
A few days ago, the U.S. Supreme Court said, President Trump, you may have the authority to end DACA, but you didn't do it in the right way. The president has said, I'm still going to try to end DACA. What do you think should happen for those that have enrolled in DACA?
Well, I definitely don't think it should be ended. So I'm going to go back to, I think this is another area that needs a real transformation on kind of how we implement these policies and how we view them. So from my perspective, we're very inhumane with how we handle immigration in general. Whether someone was brought here on their own or not, illegally or legally, I think we need to handle this with a peace-first approach with humane policies that really provide clear paths to citizenship. So, and DACA is one of those, or at least permanent residence. So it's not right that we're having these people live in fear of being deported, being kept in cages, not having any clear path to staying in the country that they've only ever known. So I think a big shift is needed there to not dehumanize these people. So we need to allow them to stay here and have a clear path for citizenship.
Should we raise the minimum wage? And if so, how high should it be?
Yeah, I think it's long overdue. I'm in favor of the plan where it goes to $15 an hour gradually over the next 4 years. But one thing I would like to add on to that is it needs to be tied to something, and I would prefer it to be tied to national productivity levels, so that whenever those go up, minimum wage follows suit and we stay on the same percentage. So we don't have to do this every 10, 20 years of should we raise it again, should we not? I think something needs to be tied to it. Other people talk about tying it to inflation, also would be fine. I think productivity is more relevant to a minimum wage discussion, but yes, absolutely.
Have you spent much time studying American foreign policy? Do you have any thoughts on how long we should have a presence in Afghanistan?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I am a big proponent of peace first foreign policy. So I'm in the generation where my entire life we have been in Afghanistan, essentially, or somewhere in the Middle East, and I think it's wrong, and I think that's something we need to get out of these endless wars. We have new presidents come in saying we're going to withdraw troops, but it never happens. So I think power needs to be shifted back to Congress to allow them to make these decisions to go to war, to not go to war, which my side of it would be to not go to war and get out of these wars that are doing no good for us or the Middle East at this point.
We've touched on several issues. Is there anything that is central or a key part of your campaign that you want to highlight that we haven't mentioned yet?
Sure. Yeah, we hit the big ones. Another big one that I really enjoy is voting reform, elections reform. So I'm a big proponent of ranked choice voting and also congressional term limits. I think those are two things that can very much at least start to end the polarization that we're seeing today. Term limits in the form of it would get back to Congress being more of a constant churn of new ideas and new faces, new people. Some people as a devil's advocate, fear that there won't be enough expertise in Washington, but I think we can make the term limits high enough where we're not in the situation we are today where there's people in there for decades, but also still have some tenured people with some experience. So I'm in favor of that. And then ranked choice voting is a idea that I love. Maine already has it in place in a ton of places around the world. So I think that would really solve the issue we're having today, where it's one versus one, and there's no in between. So we're dividing further apart. I think it would provide new issues, or it would provide more voices to the table and give us more options and have really the most popular person win, instead of what we've seen in a lot of recent presidential elections, which someone that won the popular vote necessarily did not win the presidency, and something like ranked choice voting would end that. So two big things I'm in favor of.
Some of our viewers who may not be familiar with ranked choice voting, why don't you give a brief overview of how it works?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it simple. So Ranked choice voting is, instead of voting for one specific person, you rank your votes. So say there's 3 people on the ballot, you'll have your first, second, and third preference, and your first preference will count as your first vote. So once you vote, they'll do the initial count, and if no one hits 50%, then there's a second count. So the way this works is it's ensuring that only the person with the majority wins. So let's say all 3 people get like 40, 40, and 20%. The person with the 20% would be taken out of the second count, and whoever had that person taken out as their first choice, their vote would now go to their second choice. So it would be down to the last 2, and whoever gets the most votes on the second count would win. So this would provide an opportunity for, say, I'll just use presidential examples. Let's say I have Biden as my top choice, and I want to vote Green Party second, and then Trump third. This would ensure that if Biden doesn't win, I still have a chance at Green Party getting in, that type of thing. So,
okay, and talk about the differences between you and your opponents in the August 11 primary. Why are you the most qualified?
Yeah, so one of the big differences is I joined this race late, first of all, so I came in this race already knowing who I'm going to be up against, and I mostly wasn't seeing what I thought as a voter I would like someone to represent me fight for. So I wasn't seeing the fight for climate change. I wasn't seeing the healthcare views that I think really address the core issues and many other things. I just wasn't feeling the urgency and boldness that's really needed. And I think this year is more important than ever that we really do what we can to get Glenn Grothman out of the seat, because he is actively not working towards the interests of this district, I would say. So what qualifies me is I'm fighting for these ideas that are popular and have been shown, especially from COVID, to really be needed. So I'm bringing that new voice in someone young and someone fresh to look forward instead of try to take us back to where we were before.
Well, you're up against an incumbent. They're always better funded. So how are you gonna be financially viable, Michael?
Yeah. So, and this is another thing I've been saying kind of since I joined this race is he's very well funded, and money is not going to win this race, especially not this year with so many people tuning in, so many people voting by mail, and so many people doing the research on the internet where they have this free information at their fingertips. So it's going to be all about turnout. So we're not going to, me or whoever the representative is for the Democrat side is not going to outspend Glenn Grothman. It's just not happening. He'll probably outspend us by at least double, maybe triple. So the real point is to make sure the message is clear, message is easily accessible, and the message is well received. And I think these are all things that I'm capable of doing. So as long as I have enough money to be dangerous, I'm feeling very confident.
Well, thank you. Michael Beardsley of Oshkosh is a Democratic candidate in the 6th Congressional District. The primary is August 11th. Michael, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.